Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 28 of the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. My name is Patrick Norris, and our goal today is to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. I'm so glad you're with us. In today's conversation, you're going to hear from a leading psychologist and expert in the field of trauma and addiction recovery, Dr. Stefanie Carnes. Dr. Carnes is an instructor mentor of mine. She's the president of the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, where I hold my own certification as a trauma and addiction professional. Dr. Carnes is the author of 4 books and untold numbers of other publications. She's a senior fellow at the Meadows Behavioral Healthcare and a sought-after trainer and speaker. Today's episode is titled The Heart, Soul, and Brain of Betrayal. Our conversation emphasizes insights from her new book, Courageous Love, a couple's guide to conquering betrayal. We cover everything from what betrayal is, how it manifests in leadership and organizations, to how pastors can navigate this fragile landscape when parishioners have betrayed their marriages. You will enjoy this inspiring, insightful, and energizing show. But first, I'm so glad you're with us wherever you get podcasts or in the video version on YouTube. We drop new content every week, shooting for each Thursday of the month. If this podcast is adding value to your leadership and life, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the podcast, like it, and comment in the reviews. Also, help us get the word out by sharing on your own social media platforms. If you subscribe and comment at iTunes, it'll make our show pop up in recommended shows, and we would really appreciate that. Have you ever wanted to figure you out? You know that if you could solve you or have a deeper understanding of spouses, friends, teammates, and leaders in your organization, you would be unstoppable. When you or your colleagues become stuck, unmotivated, or even triggered, how do you make sense of all that? Join us at our next personal discovery experience with me, Patrick Norris, and psychologist, therapist, Dr. Todd Bowman. Personal discovery experiences are 2-hour online events with a group of 6 to 20 peers as we discover the roots that drive individual stories. These training events are designed for both pastor leaders and for those who simply want to know what drives them. Our next personal discovery experience cohort for church ministry staff is July the 22nd. The next cohort for the general population is August 9th, and the next senior pastors cohort will be August the 10th. To find out more, go to redinkrrevival.com/driven-people. Would you like to know how addictions form? Would you like to be better equipped to know what drives addictions like alcohol, drugs, porn, promiscuity, gambling, excessive spending, and more? Maybe you have people in your congregation that need credible help right now. Maybe you're the one who actually struggles. We want to train leaders as well as walk with those in need of recovery. The Red Ink recovery process is proven to be effective, designed around theology, psychology, and neuroscience. In July, we're hosting a free webinar Monday, July 13th at 6 p.m. Central Time. Join psychologist Dr. Todd Bowman, a leading expert in addiction recovery, and me, Patrick Norris, a certified trauma and addiction professional. We want to give you an adventure of a lifetime. The adventure of real leadership and real freedom. Again, redinkrrevival.com. For all my pastor friends, if you'd like to co-host a free online Driven People, Driven Leaders webinar with me by inviting a group of your pastor colleagues and networks, we'd love to talk. All you have to do is get 5 to 10 or more senior pastors rallied to jump on with you, and we'll create a private showing just for your tribe. Go to redinkrrevival.com/pastors to check it all out. Then contact us with your interest. We'll get back with you as quick as possible to assess the opportunity. And it's all free. Go check it out. We also have co-hosting opportunities for church staff, school administrators and faculty, and marketplace leaders for their networks or staff. I hope that you'll contact us real soon. Go to redincrevival.com and check out everything we're up to. While you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post as well as all of our upcoming events. If you go now to sign up, you'll find out so much that's available to help you. Let's go now to this week's episode number 28 with my instructor and mentor, Dr. Stefanie Carnes, as we talk about the heart, soul, and brain of betrayal. Welcome, everybody, to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I am so excited today to have Dr. Stefanie Carnes in the house. She's the president of the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals, which is a global leader in organization and training professionals in treating addictive and compulsive behaviors. And it's so incredibly dear to my heart. It's where I'm certified as a professional in trauma and addiction work. And I have had so much impact. The modeling that we have at Red Ink Revival, all is derived from what I've learned from Dr. Carnes and her dad, Dr. Patrick Carnes, as well as the entire ITAP staff and professors. Dr. Carnes actually has a prolific biography. She is a senior fellow at Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, which is an inpatient treatment center and a foremost leader in trauma and addiction recovery. Dr. Carnes is the clinical architect of the Willow House, which is a unique program at the Meadows, providing relationship healing for women struggling with sex, love, and intimacy disorders. She's a certified sexual addiction therapist and supervisor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she is a leading authority in working with partner trauma from infidelity and betrayal. She's a leading expert in areas of multiple addictions, eating disorders, and chemical dependency. She's also the author of several publications, including her books, Mending a Shattered Heart, Facing Heartbreak, Facing Addiction, and her new book, which I'm so excited to talk to her about today, is Courageous Love, A Couple's Guide to Conquering Betrayal. And as you can imagine, she is a sought-after conference speaker, and she trains in all these areas of expertise. Dr. Carnes, it is amazing to have you with us. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Patrick.
Let's jump into the first question. Tell us a little bit about your backstory and what motivated you to become a trauma and addiction professional.
Well, it's kind of funny because initially that wasn't what I set out to do. So as you know, I have a very famous father in the field. And so when I first got my degree, I wanted to kind of go pave my own way. And I was a faculty in a marriage and family therapy training program. And I was in private practice. And initially I worked in medical family therapy and worked with brain injuries and spinal cord injuries and things like that. And then over the years, Pat would, say, do this project with me, come to this conference, come work with me. And eventually, I guess about 20 years ago, we started working more and more together. And then I got a job opportunity to co-run an inpatient program with him. And it was just the right time. And then that was really the beginning of our work together. So, and I really, it's been such a great decision for me because working in the area of compulsive and addictive sexual behaviors, it's so profoundly rewarding to see people's lives transform because they come in so much pain and anguish, and really recovery is possible, and it's so great to see them make the transformations that they do. So it's been a great decision for me in terms of my career, and it's been a joy to work with my father.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and Dr. Patrick Carnes is he's such a hero in the world of addiction. I am glad you jumped in those projects. I'm glad he invited you, and I'm glad you jumped in because your leadership at the International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals is amazing. I love when I see you weigh in on things. Every time you post something in our listserv, I'm like, oh, I better read that. She's going to bring some gold somewhere. So I love your leadership in all that we're doing. When it comes to sexual addiction, sometimes there's such taboo around that whole label gambling. I like to help people understand that if you understand sexual addiction, you are actually understanding the science behind really all compulsive behavior, and really anything that's unwanted or unmanageable drivers, you have a good insight. Can you talk to that just for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of parallels with what happens from a neuroscience perspective with compulsive sexual behaviors and what happens with substance use disorder, gambling, gaming, the other behavioral addictions. And so it's really an area of growing research. And there have been some amazing studies that have really looked at how the brain is similar in those ways. We call it the incentive salience theory of addiction, which is really commonly known as the disease model of addiction. And there's a lot of new research evidence that's pointing in that direction. Now, the World Health Organization that recently gave us the diagnosis of compulsive sexual behavior disorder, finally, we have something that we can use, which is wonderful. It has gone a long way to legitimize things. They're still evaluating, ultimately where the diagnosis is going to wind up. But right now they've categorized it as an impulse control disorder. And, we'll see. That's how gambling was also initially categorized. And then it was eventually moved to addictive disorders. But it's been a huge movement in the field towards legitimizing compulsive and addictive behaviors as a real problem. And it's been a long time coming, really.
Yeah. And so if somebody struggles with anxiety or rage or depression, if they're struggling with any internal emotional cycle, what we learn in understanding the addictive drivers is just really the over umbrella of understanding all of those emotional drivers as well. So even if somebody's not struggling in the throes of an addiction, to understand the modeling really helps you get a beautiful window into who you are, what went into the formation of your drivers, and it really becomes the lens for which you become wholehearted. Would you agree with all of that?
Oh, absolutely. And for so many of our patients, that the driver is trauma, right? I mean, so many of our clients have complex trauma, abuse histories that need to be treated and healed in order for them to really, move forward in their lives. And the addiction is just a way to medicate that.
Wow. So when you say trauma, let's just for a minute pull that apart. What is trauma? And because a lot of people would think, I grew up in a pretty good home, I've never had any trauma, and yet when you really begin to do the work, you find that there are issues that have impacted their attachment to their primary caretakers and then ultimately their spouses and children. And can you just talk to what trauma is and how it plays out in our lives?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of our clients come in thinking, I didn't have trauma, because they think of trauma as being like combat or something like that. But really, 80% of people in the country, in the world, if you look at prevalence rates, have experienced trauma. And those are like significant trauma events. In the clinical world, we talk about big T and little t traumas. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression before, but little t traumas are very, very significant when they're cumulative, and they can create what's called complex trauma. So things like bullying and emotional abuse and neglect and things like that people might not actually think of as trauma can be very, very significant if it's cumulative and chronic over time. And so when we look at trauma, we don't just look at these very significant events like a major car accident or a rape or something like that. We also look at all of the smaller events that accumulate over time. And when people have a lot of these smaller events, in addition to large events, we call that complex trauma. That's a very short version of what complex trauma is, but and it's just very, very prevalent in addiction. And, it's something that, practitioners really need to be trained in terms of how to treat that, because it's so central to the process.
It's interesting because the little t trauma, or the aggregate of a bunch of small events that happened, this is not kind of psychologist talk to sensationalize the trauma. This is actually talking about the way the brain has evolved from the time a child is born all the way to where they are today, for how they have this fear, this fight, flight, freeze, this anxiety, and even the anger that can rise up in somebody is associated in the brain to how it sizes up threats. So this is a profound part of why we do what we do, and it actually is very it's not very well known as a huge driver. Well, when we talk about some of the things that are related to addiction and related to somebody who has acted out, they've spent large amounts of money, they've wasted a lot of time, and ultimately they injure the people that are closest to them. And one of the things that you are, and I'll say this, I don't know how you would posture it, but I'll say it, you are a leading expert in the world of partner betrayal. That whenever somebody is betrayed in an addiction kind of fueled relationship, there's a lot of pain that happens. There's pain in the primary marital relationship. There's pain in the children as they're a part of the awareness, or they become aware of what's just happened. And so when we look at betrayal, we can look at betrayal and the impact it has on the brain and the body. It's true with sexual infidelity. It's also true whenever in corporate settings or in church settings there's a betrayal of a colleague. It's also true today in the awareness of racial brutality. There is also a betrayal wound that happens there in injury. And so we're going to drill into the partner side, into the relationship side with your great book, Courageous Love, which incidentally, I love that book. That was so good. I can't wait for it to be out. And can you just help us understand betrayal trauma, what it actually is, and how it impacts our brains and bodies?
Yeah, certainly. So what research has shown, and this is really a newer area of research too, and I think it's very under-recognized in our popular culture. You know, people don't often think of betrayal as a traumatic event, but the research on that has been very clear in recent years that people that experience betrayal have PTSD symptoms and meet all, oftentimes about 70% meet all the criteria for PTSD, except for the one that says you feel like your life is going to end, like you're going to die. But for a lot of people that experience betrayal, they feel like their life is over as they know it, right? And so, what we see with people that experience betrayal trauma is very, very significant PTSD symptoms. And the research shows that about 72% of them have severe functional impairment, and meaning that it's hard for them to get through their daily lives. Like, just getting through work is hard. They have difficulty concentrating. They, just getting through life is very difficult when it's a very emotional time and people are devastated. And I think from a cultural standpoint, our culture doesn't recognize betrayed partners as being as significantly impacted and as needing as much support as they do. And for many partners, they feel like they can't tell anybody. That's kind of like, it's still very stigmatized, infidelity and compulsive addictive sexual behaviors, pornography addiction is still very stigmatized. So they feel like they can't tell anybody and get the support that they need. But we know that this is significantly impacting them. And you mentioned, too, the brain. We know that, with PTSD, we have our stress response is very heightened in our brain. As you mentioned, our amygdalas are firing. We have heightened response, and it can really impact our health. There's a lot of good research. Maybe you've heard of the ACEs study that looks at the linkages between trauma and health. And when you have toxic levels of stress and trauma, like partners do when they've experienced betrayal, you start to see stomach upset, headache, headaches, autoimmune issues, things like that. It's very, very, we have an increased cortisol and norepinephrine relief in our body. That's being triggered by the stress response in our brain. So it's it's a lot to manage. It's very difficult for our partners and also our other family members that are aware of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is so interesting because, like, even in church world, I as a pastor and being around a lot of the church society over my career, 35 plus years as a senior leader, it's interesting because when there is a betrayal or there is an addiction, particularly in a church staff member, what ends up happening is the church tries to often get that staff member out of the family that is the church, move them out, try to secretly deal with their stuff, and the wife, which is usually the case, the wife is left with this sense of you're not welcome here anymore. You are the victim and you are the betrayed, but now then we're not taking care of you. We're not leaning into you with comfort and intimacy. I even was in a group last summer, and there was a lady who was attending a church down in Texas, and a large mega church, and her husband had had affairs on her. And the pastor of the church leaned in on her in a counseling session and said, well, were you making yourself available to him sexually?
Right.
And the knife that just got pushed right into her heart. And of course, us in our group, as we heard that, we were all ready to jump up and defend her. And, we told her how dysfunctional that was in relationship with her pastor. But you hear these stories on the regular.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that's such an important point that you make, Patrick, because I've heard that story over and over again in church environments. And I think it's so important that we really be mindful that these partners are hurting and really, come in and support them. I mean, they, in most of the cases had no idea what was happening, or if they did know about anything, if like a little bit of the pornography use or some strip club use or whatever, it's usually just a bit of what was happening, and they were trying to work through it. And they often didn't know about the whole addiction. So for them, it's like their whole world is blown apart. They're just finding this out. And they didn't have a role in that and in enabling that. So they really need to be supported.
Yeah. And I think about not only that, and we're going to get right back to the partner, the marriage kind of relationship where there is betrayal, but even in organizations, if a leader, which is not uncommon, some people who have a therapeutic background in pastoral leadership, they say that somewhere 90 to 100% of pastors struggle with codependency, which is around the idea of I find my sense of emotional self as I'm pleasing and feeling powerful around my congregation. So when a significant person leaves the church, leaves and transitions the leadership, some of the same grieving processes happen within a leader of feeling completely isolated, discomforted, because as a leader, you can't go tell the congregation. As a leader, you can't tell the pain, the sorrow, you can't tell the real story. And the storylines in the congregation spin into all these things that as a pastor, you're like, man, that's not anywhere near what happened, but I can't speak to it. If I do, what I end up doing is sounding like I'm defending something, or I'm making them look bad, which everybody else in the congregation then will identify with, and it just becomes it's a fighting ground scenario. So leaders often feel this kind of disparity, this isolation, the same kind of grieving process. So I think as I read your book, I even applied several of the principles into my own leadership in that environment as well. Now let's jump back to the partner side of it. In marriage and romantic relationships, how can the unfaithful party help their partner heal, and what actions can he or she take to restore the coupleship?
Right. Well, the first thing that's really important is that both parties acknowledge and understand betrayal trauma. They need some education.
Wow.
And basically what the reality is that a lot that partners that have experienced betrayal have a lot of very common responses. Emotional dysregulation. They'll do a lot of what I call safety seeking, in which they'll some people will call it like detective behaviors, where they'll look, try and follow up around the betrayal. Really, what that is they're trying to see if the party is recommitting to the relationship. Is the relationship safe? What's going on? They'd be very angry, and these type and sometimes even a little unstable. They're cognitively they might be struggling. They'll have damaged self-esteem, feeling like it was their fault.
Yeah.
So all of these things we look at that as normal responses to betrayal, and we don't pathologize those reactions. And we ask the unfaithful party to also not pathologize those reactions, and to, as you said earlier, lean in and support that person. And so we teach them effective responses to this. So ineffective responses are like blame shifting, like what you said earlier, like, well, if you had been more sexually available to me, I wouldn't have had to do this, right? And that's just really, really unhelpful in this kind of situation. Ongoing lying and gaslighting, minimizing, defensiveness. These kind of responses are really, they do not help bring the couple together. Yeah. And so what we want the unfaithful party to do is to, I do betrayal trauma sensitivity training with them, is what I call it. And basically it's like, you need to be open. You need to answer the questions that your partner has. You need to provide reassurance and transparency, provide verification that the betrayal has ended. You need to be patient. I tell my couples that the only way to restore trust is reliable behavior over time. You need to be reliable, just be where you say you're going to be impeccable with your words, show up, demonstrate commitment. And so we need them to respond that way. And the thing is a lot of people, oftentimes the unfaithful party will be like, I'm doing so well. I don't know why he or she is still so upset. And they don't realize this is a 3 to 5 year process. They have to do this for a long time and be realistic that this takes a long time to heal. And so they have to do these kind of behaviors and be very sensitive to their partner's pain for many years. And so in the book, I give some tools in terms of how to respond when your partner is triggered, like give them the little models and acronyms and techniques for how to do that. And that's really important. So we want them to respond in a sensitive and compassionate, empathetic manner to their hurt partner.
And that is the key, really, to awakening the connection, the feelings, the love for each other. And yet, again, when they're in the throes of this tension, they sometimes the unfaithful partner will say, why don't you just get over it? Why? We've talked about this 15 times. Why don't you just get over it? And of course, that is minimizing. And what we know, what you know, and what I know is that the unfaithful partner has such a shame profile that they never feel like they're enough. They don't feel like they belong. There's a lot of energy that's built into the amygdala for the fight, flight, freeze towards themselves. They look at themselves as being an enemy. And so when their betrayed partner becomes reactive in some kind of way, the unfaithful partner will look at them and it just causes a new cycle of shame to happen, and they just want you to get over it so they don't have to deal with their shame. And the answer to that is for the unfaithful partner to actually turn towards their shame and allow the exploration and the reprocessing of the shame without minimizing or becoming judgmental or condemning towards the betrayed partner. And you see this all the time. What are some things that you see when you see an unfaithful partner betraying and then judging the emotionally wounded betrayed partner, what are some of the things that you see when that takes place?
Yeah, it becomes a vicious cycle where, both parties kind of dig in and defend their position. And that's not what either party wants.
Yeah.
Ultimately, as human beings, we all want attachment, love, and connection, right? That's
Yeah.
what they all want. And if they dig into what's underneath this and start having real conversations and more vulnerable conversations about how they're really feeling and what their fears are. It's really important for couples to get into couples therapy. I'll just say, it's very hard to get through this alone, and getting an expert in there, somebody that's really well trained in couples therapy that can help you navigate this is really, really important, because a couples therapist can help you open up those more vulnerable conversations and help you get underneath what those defensive stances are and talk about what your real fears are.
Amazing.
And it's so easy for us to get locked in some cycle of arguing that, couples get into these regular dances that they do, and they just repeat the same cycle with a different topic.
Yeah.
Right? It's a pattern that they get into and they get very ingrained. But in couples therapy, what you can do is look at what's underneath of those patterns and start to open up real conversations. And you can really look at these moments of pain in a coupleship as an opportunity to connect with one another.
Come on.
And that's really how you need to look at it, right? And that's what ultimately they both want.
Yes.
And so just being able to allow for space for vulnerability and to get everything out on the table is so important.
One of the things that gives me handles around these relational and even internal drivers is understanding the brain. There's something about the science, the observability of the brain, the measurability, the predictability of outcomes based on what you've observed. When we talk about, as an example, the amygdala's fight, flight, freeze, one of the great ways to understand the brain is the simplistic triune brain, right? It's the idea that the brainstem, which is the most primal, is only asking the question, will I survive? And then you have the midbrain, the limbic system, that's asking, do I belong? And then you have the prefrontal cortex, the higher brain, that's asking, what can I learn? And it's interesting whether we're talking about marriage betrayal or, again, right now in the area of racism betrayal, the question that needs to be answered first and foremost is, will you survive? Secondly, what needs to be answered is, do you belong? Once those two are dealt with, then the prefrontal cortex, the higher brain, can come online. But until those two are calmed with the intensity that is driving survival and belonging, until those two are actually dealt with, the higher brain is never going to come online to cognitively process what has happened. So when an unfaithful partner has just created this massive wound in their betrayed partner, and they're wanting to rationalize them into emotional stability, that is impossible. It's not until you do everything you've just said, you lean in with empathy, you allow them to see that you care about them, there's commitment there, you're building that over days, weeks, months, and you said years. You're building this back into their brain, the instinct that you're safe, you are safe. And then we answer the question of you belong. And then finally, maybe after we have emotionally connected with I love you, I see you, I feel you, I sit with you in your pain, then we move into the next part of maybe what we can learn and talk through some things. And it is interesting because even in the issue of racism right now, I'm always amazed at how people will pull videos of various arguments, and they allow the argument to, for them, answer a question that actually is not the question we need to be answering. that if in racism we would simply listen and hear and emotionally be present with people who have very real, deep pain stories, then after we've connected, yes, there's things that need to be talked about. But that's not what we're doing. What we want to do is love people, care for people, and it'll help them process. So now then,
Absolutely.
was there anything you wanted to add on to that? I've kind of just teed some of that up.
Right. No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, for many of our people of color, they've experienced this horrific racial trauma that's been generations after generations and passed down. And for them, they have, their amygdalas are fired up, right?
Yes.
It's a very painful time, and it's a painful time for all of us. It's painful to watch it, but especially for our people of color, right?
Yes.
And so the response isn't to be defensive or shift blame. You have to empathize and open up conversations and allow people to express their pain and really provide empathy and compassion around that. So I completely agree with you 100%.
I love that. And I love if we were able to get into people's stories and hear their stories, what that does therapeutically for them. Because what you were talking about with trauma, every time a George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, any of these stories that happen, the traumatic wound is re-injured again. Right. And it's not just for a person individually of color, it's for them as a dad, a mom, a child, an uncle, an aunt. It's all the stories of a lifetime reawaken. And again, you go through all of the emotional issues that take place whenever there is a betrayal. So I love, again, how you take all in Courageous Love, your book, you take all of these different principles that are really about how the brain connects to humans and helps you live wholeheartedly. It takes all of that, and then you can actually apply it to multiple areas that you interact with.
That's true.
It's
Absolutely.
so good. Well, let's talk about the honesty. Is it important to get honest about facts that are surrounding the betrayal? Because in a marriage, if you lean into the betrayal and you are honest about your facts, doesn't that just re-injure or pull the wound wide open again?
Well, the first thing I would say is that it's important to honor the partner's wishes on this, because some partners will say, I don't want to know. And it's really important to respect that. In most cases, most partners will have questions about the betrayal. They'll want to know, different aspects. They'll have, sometimes they'll even want to know detailed information, which may end up being painful for them and increase their PTSD. Wow. And it's just because they're, they have so much. They've lost their reality when they were lied to, if they were experienced gaslighting. So they have a lot of questions because they're trying to reclaim what happened, what really happened, and what is reality. So it's normal for them to have a lot of questions about what happened and how they were lied to. And so the vast majority of partners have questions and start pursuing information. And it's really important that the unfaithful person answer those questions. If you look at the literature and the research around that, for example, there was a study, Dr. John Gottman, maybe you're familiar with some of his work out of Washington. He looked at couples in which there was betrayal, and he had betrayers that were willing to answer questions in one group and the betrayers that weren't willing to answer questions in another group. And the ones that were willing to answer questions had an 86% marriage survival rate. And the ones that weren't willing had a 59% survival rate, which is significant on just that variable. Yeah. So we know that that's an important part of healing, because what ends up happening is you get this dynamic in the couple where the partner will continue to pursue for information because they need some clarity around this. And then the unfaithful person is like denying, avoiding, trying to not, get out of it. Yeah. And that's a very unhealthy dynamic to set up. So it's often better to rip the Band-Aid off, and answer all the questions, get the information on the table, and then heal from that.
Yeah.
So we call that a disclosure. We recommend that be facilitated by therapists so that the appropriate amount of information can come out and it be in a supportive manner when both parties have support. It's not an easy process, but it is important for the healing for both parties.
In that being honest, it reminds you of the metaphor of having cancer, going to a doctor, and them opening your body up surgically to pull the cancer out, and then your body reheals. Well, in the immediate surgery, it feels like you're doing more damage to me,
Sure.
but in reality, you are not. When it comes to disclosure, I mean, here's a big thing where. What if the disclosure has too much shared? What if there are items that end up creating negativity in the betrayed partner? How do you manage all that? Let's talk about disclosures.
Yeah. So if I'm working with a betrayed partner, one of the things that I really try to advise them is, I say, let's advocate for ourselves to get clear factual information that doesn't leave you guessing about what happened, but not painful details. Because this is, this can increase PTSD symptoms.
Yes.
It can make you, keep you up at night. These are the kind of, that kind of thing can run, just run crazy in your brain, right? And so really what we want to do is clarify facts, get the information on the table with as minimal amount of painful details as possible. Now, if there's a particular detail that the partner is asking for because they're trying to make sense out of something that happened, well, then, that's understandable.
Wow.
But in general, we're not going to talk about, where they went for dinner or what they were wearing or, those kinds of things. That just creates a lot of pain that is, just really hurtful for the partner.
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Norris, and I'd like to introduce you to our Red Ink Revival Leadership Platform, where we offer resources and experiential discovery to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. We believe driven people ought to know what they're driven by. Odds are you're already a high achiever and a visionary. But what are you driven by? What are your teammates driven by? What is your organization driven by? If you've ever struggled to figure you out, to know what winds you up or shuts you down, if you've ever been mystified by teammates who are stuck in old patterns of thinking, control, codependence, risk-averse, grandiosity, and more, or if you have strived to change the culture of your organization, but somehow the opposing current has just been too strong, now more than ever, understanding the drivers behind your life really matters. Your leadership journey to wholeheartedness begins with our flagship free webinar, Driven People, Driven Leaders. This hour-long training is with inspiring and fresh insights from neuroscience, psychology, and theology to help you grow in wholeheartedness in every sphere of life. Go to redinkrevival.com today and find out more. For all my pastor friends, how would you like to co-host a Driven People, Driven Leaders webinar with me? If you want to invest in other pastor friends, inviting a group of your colleagues and networks, we'd love to set that up with you. All you have to do is get 5 to 10 or more senior pastors rallied to jump on with you, and we'll create a private showing just for your tribe. And it's free. Go to redinkrevival.com/pastors to check it all out. While you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post, and then subscribe to our weekly podcast at redinkrevival.com. Is it important to name names or to give exact scenarios in terms of it was with this person, if you know the person, it's this person? Is that important?
So what I usually recommend is that if it's somebody that the partner knows or is going to run into on an ongoing basis, then they have a right to know who that person was, and that can be difficult because there can be situations where it's somebody that they work with or somebody that they in the neighborhood or what have you. But if you can imagine, if the unfaithful party is trying to be honest and get all the information on the table, and so that the couple can move on. And let's say it is the neighbor, right? And 6 months later, the partner finds out it was the neighbor and you didn't tell me.
Yeah.
That is a whole nother revelation that brings it all back up, and it makes it worse. So it becomes then what we call a staggered disclosure, where information just comes out in drips and drabs over time. And in couples therapy, we call that death by a million cuts. Right? It's like, that is not healthy for the relationship. So it's, it's sometimes sounds counterintuitive, but it's really better to just rip the Band-Aid off and get it out and then heal from it. Because really what is most painful to partners is the deception.
Yeah.
So the partner isn't sitting there going, so for the last 6 months, you kept it a secret that it was our neighbor? How could you do that, right?
Yeah.
So the deception is often more painful than the actual act itself.
Wow. That's a big statement right there.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, after the disclosure, which is a formalized, this is the way that you would encourage it, which I love how you have helped us in understanding, guiding people through these things. But it needs to have support. It needs to be formalized. It doesn't need to be random and yet my experience as a pastor is I'll tell a couple who's had betrayal, we need to we need to have a formal disclosure and not stagger it. And yet the anxiety in the one who was unfaithful or the betrayed partner, they end up just right there in the moment. And what would you say about that? How do you help that once it's already, they've kind of blown the dynamite keg?
Right. That's a good description. Yeah. So when that happens, then you're kind of on, you're working to clean up the mess afterwards, right? Because oftentimes too much information is shared. The person is unsupported. Typically, those end up being pretty traumatic situations. Whereas when it's planned, you can have, like, we do things like the betrayed partner, both parties oftentimes will have a support person there. They'll have a scheduled for the week. They'll have therapy sessions scheduled to help them process this. There's the disclosures laid out in an organized fashion, so it's easy to understand. The partner has the opportunity to ask questions in an environment that's supported. Yeah. So we really want, for us, we look at that as an ethical and responsible way to do it, as opposed to just, dumping it on a partner when they have no support.
Yeah.
And they don't know what they don't know. A lot of partners will be like, they'll be asking for it and they want the information, but then they're totally traumatized when they get it. So because they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they don't realize what they're asking for. Yeah. It's really, they really do need to be supported in that time.
And ideally, as you said, to have both partners have their own therapeutic support, which isn't just somebody to emotionally process, though that is invaluable to the individual. So as you can imagine, everybody who's listening, when there is a disclosure that's made, sometimes the betrayed partner doesn't even know what to do. They don't know what to ask. They don't know how to actually lean in or to guard or protect their heart and soul. They don't know what to do. They don't know the boundaries involved. To have a therapist there with them who's trained in partner betrayal is actually equipping them not only for the potential of recovering the relationship, but for that betrayed partner to have the potential to restore themselves, just to be back to a wholehearted human, which the relationship can't go further than the two individuals themselves. So it's absolutely important, and that can't be stressed enough, that both partners have support to help them process the best way. I know a lot of people will, particularly the unfaithful partner, will think, I'll just do it by instinct. And they have no idea that they're just blowing things up left and right, when what they needed was to be able to come in with a surgeon's knife and be able to deal with the pain as it needs to be dealt with. And they can't do it if they've never been trained in it. And so I would even say for pastors to prioritize understanding this. I would encourage them to get your book, Courageous Love. And Mending a Shattered Heart is another book that you've written that is just amazing, to be able to understand what has happened and how to guide couples in our churches through this process. But it isn't something that's marginal. It's actually just very, very critical. Well, we've gotten to the disclosure. Now let's go post-disclosure. How do we heal? How do we help couples heal?
Right. So in Courageous Love, I have a process that I've laid out in which after disclosure, you don't just want to dump the information on the partner and then, they don't get any sort of opportunity to respond. And so I created what's called an impact letter and an impact process. Awesome. So basically it's an 8-part letter in which the partner writes out. It's the most common areas that betrayed partners are hurting in. And so they have the opportunity. It's important for them to express to the unfaithful party the pain points. This is what hurt me the most. This is what I'm, really wrestling with emotionally. So it's not like an anger letter. It's a way they lay out what the pain points are so that the other person can really understand. Wow. And that's the goal, is that we want the unfaithful party to get it and really understand what this experience was like for the betrayed partner. And then, so we basically, like, for example, I just did a impact process with a partner. Hers was, we spent 4.5 hours on hers, and it was 15 pages long of all the things. And it was incredibly helpful for her to be able to share what was most painful, all the different aspects of this that were most painful. This was a 31-year marriage, right? So there's a lot there. And for the unfaithful person to really be able to put themselves in the partner's shoes and to get it. We want them to get it, right? So that they can really empathize. And then after the impact letter, I have the unfaithful party do what's called emotional restitution, which is basically a process of validating the partner's pain and really going into these different areas that they've identified and responding to that. And it's basically it's an amends and an apology on a more formalized kind of level. Yeah. It's, the partner has to see the unfaithful person take accountability and really understand in order to have enough hope to reinvest in the relationship. And that is really important. So they need to hear from the unfaithful person, I get how much this hurt you, and it's not going to happen again, right? Yeah. They need to make that commitment, and they need to make that apology. And so that's an important part of the healing process post-disclosure. And then you can really start to work on repair. Wow. Intimacy repair of the sexual relationship. So this is how you can see why it's a 3 to 5 year process, right?
Oh my gosh, sure.
It is. You want to get to a point with the couple where they can get some closure, where they get to a new level in their relationship, where they can, a lot of times when you get to that point, the couple can look back and say, oh, that was so painful. But if we had never gone through that, we would have never gotten to this level in our relationship. We would have never gotten closer in our relationship. So really, when the couple has recovered, and gone through this whole process, they can actually be better partners than they ever were before. Once they have a better understanding of this and have really opened up to, from a vulnerability perspective to a new level of intimacy in their relationship, they can achieve more closeness than they ever had before the betrayal. But it's a lot of work. Right?
Come on. I want to put a big highlight on that, because that is so counterintuitive for somebody to generally believe that if a unfaithful partner has had multiple acting out of the marriage, multiple betrayals, multiple occasions of strip clubs, massage parlors, they have an addiction to pornography. There's all these different components, or that combined with maybe the affairs that were with ladies in the neighborhood, if it's a guy that's the unfaithful partner. Well, it seems like there is absolutely no way that there could ever be a restored relationship. And what you have experienced working with couples is, if the restoration process is done well, if it's a healthy process like you are writing about and that you have expressed here, that actually the new restored relationship can actually exceed what they ever had from the time they met all the way to where they are now. This could actually be better. Can you just, again, put a stamp on that of your experience working with hundreds and even thousands of couples through our organization?
Right. Well, what I tell, like when I work with sex addicts, I work with sex addicts in my groups at the Meadows. One of the things that I talk to them about is they get so discouraged, right? They feel so much shame, like oh my God, I've destroyed my relationships. They feel like they feel so worthless and so defective. And I tell them, like, recovering addicts can make great partners, right? You are learning skills in your recovery that can make you a much better person to be in a lifelong relationship with. Just like, for example, what they're learning in their groups. Oftentimes they go to group and they're sharing for the first time at a very profound level, much deeper emotional vulnerability than they have ever shared before. In their therapy, then they transfer that to therapy. In their 12-step work, they're starting to learn how to get real, and they're transforming. They're starting to live in integrity. They learn how to be vulnerable. They learn these skills. And what you have to do in recovery is transition that to your relationship. Yeah. And couples therapy is central to that.
Amazing.
Learning how to be vulnerable and intimate in your relationship. So you can actually be a much better partner after recovery, post-discovery, than you ever were before. Amazing. Because you have new levels of insight. Absolutely. And I've seen it happen over and over with couples that have successfully worked a program and, transformed their relationships.
So clearly not a theory. Clearly we have experience that shows this over and over and over again, which again is amazing. Well, on the impact letter and the restitution letter, I think it's so powerful because the impact letter is actually helping the betrayed partner to dig into their emotional wells and to understand what is happening inside of them, that if they didn't have the process that you're talking about, they wouldn't often even know that it's there, or the basic armoring up that we often instinctively do is just repress it. We suppress these things. And so what you're doing is saying, this isn't about anger, this is about vulnerability. What we're doing is training you how to first be in touch with who you are, to represent your true self, and then in vulnerability share that, which then allows for the restitution side to be trained so that they know that now this isn't cognitive data. We're not just talking words or ideas. This is actually human hearts, and more specific to the brain, these are human brains, neurons that are teaching each other how to attach and connect and have the deep level of intimacy that really every human longs for. anymore. You've just given handles to it. You've given a lane to it. You've given steps to it. Let's talk about trust, because it's one thing to go through some of these things and be in the middle of the impact letter, restitution letter, but now what do we do to get couples to move towards trust again?
Right. So basically, remember when I was talking about reliable behavior over time, right? So when you have partners know when the unfaithful party is committed. They can pick that up, right? They know when the person is genuine, and so, like, for example, when I see, let's take a case of a sex addiction. What I see when somebody is really working a program and they're doing those effective responses with sharing their treatment plan, being open, being transparent, answering questions, doing all these things that we ask them to do, the partner's safety seeking, right, and fear start to go down because they can see that this is happening. When somebody is riding the fence of recovery, they're being defensive, they don't want to share their phone, they don't want to, those kind of behaviors, that creates fear in the part of the partner. And so it's really, for when the unfaithful party says, why are they still so upset? They also need to look at, what am I doing to make this a more trustworthy situation and to be a more reliable and trustworthy person and make my partner feel more assured, right? Because this is a relationship. There's two parties here. Both have an effect on this. So you can, the unfaithful person can really help the unfaithful person feel more comfortable by their actions.
Yes.
And there's still going to be triggers. There's still going to be moments of untrust when that's happening. But it gets better over time. It's like grief. Grief comes in waves, and it over time, over long periods of time, it slowly gets better. Similar. This is similar.
It's interesting because the unfaithful partner, when they are in the trust rebuilding, sometimes they feel constricted. They feel like they are in prison because now then their phones are supposed to be available 24/7. They have different kinds of filters and monitoring software on their computers. They have GPS trackers on their phones or whatever, and if it's ever off, then so they can feel like they are in prison. And one of the things that I like to do is to tell them, look, this is a gift. This isn't prison. You're a prison if you're a victim. You're not the victim here. What you're doing is simply saying, I want something. I want intimacy with my partner. And it's a gift you give the relationship. And because it's a gift you give the relationship so it can thrive, it's a gift you give yourself, which then means that you're no longer in the emotional victim seat. You're now a person that's a free moral agent. You have power. You have choice. You're choosing. Nobody's making you do it. You're choosing to say, if this is the way that I go about empathizing with your pain, I'll do whatever I can to gift you with that. And it does shift the emotional responses in it. So let's talk about rekindling the romance. Let's talk about the falling in and falling out of love idea of how do we get a couple who's had betrayal to fall back into love in the street language of relationships.
Right. So one of the things I really want couples to do is rebuild their friendship and start looking at rebuilding that friendship. And so what were the things that they used to do that used to bring them joy and that have always been fun? Where are the connection points? And you really need to integrate some positives back in the relationship in order to counterbalance all of this pain that's been going on.
Yes.
So whether it's taking walks in nature or watching, America's Got Talent together, or, whatever it is that you guys enjoy doing, ways that you can connect and that are positive. And that is really, really important. So I actually have couples make a list and a plan of where that they can start integrating those things. And then also just affection, so different non-sexual affection like back rubs and foot rubs, and starting to get your physical affection back when appropriate, and then eventually your sexual connection back. And that, again, is something that can be guided by couples therapy. We do in Courageous Love a couples sexual health plan. It's like this heart exercise that they do.
So good.
And where they really decide what feels safe right now for them, because a lot of partners will have reminders, things that are reminders of the betrayal that are still pain points. A lot of people in recovery will have behaviors that they are not engaging in at that time. So it's helpful to map that out.
Yeah.
And to protect the relationship. And so in that plan, I have them identify not just their sexual abstinence list, basically, yep, and what boundaries areas they need, but also what are their friendship activities that they're going to be doing? What are their kind of nurturing activities that they're going to be doing? What are their healthy sexual behaviors? What will that look like? We want couples to know that their sexuality at some point can be fun again for them and feel vibrant and connecting again. So that's all really, really important. And then emotional intimacy too. So I have couples do emotional check-ins. We use a technique that was developed by Mark and Deborah Lazar. I don't know if you know their work, called the Fanos. And so they gave me permission to put that in the book. So that's in there. It's a way to emotionally connect with one another. And so it is important to kind of rebuild the relationship on all of those aspects, emotional, physical, and sexual as well.
I find not only in relationships where there's been betrayal, but also in just everyday coupleships, there is a desire to have an increased intensity of love, of feeling alive and connected and excited. And, after the couple goes through their first year or two of marriage, then sometimes those things level out. And it's interesting how we think that stuff is so random. It's just stuff that happens to us. And I have these feelings or I don't have these feelings. And what, again, neuroscience gifts us with is handles to see there are things that you can do to create neurochemical experiences. We know that thoughts are just two neurons talking together or two neurons firing together. And then when they fire, they wire. So a thought isn't random. A thought is actually something happening in your brain. And then when those neurons fire together, they release neurochemicals. When neurochemicals release, you have emotions or experiences. In fact, all experiences we have has an emotional component, a neurochemical component to it. And so when you think of Dr. Gottman's work, in relationships where the number one factor of whether the relationship will thrive or die is based on contempt. Whatever the contempt measurement is in the relationship is a determining factor to its success. Well, let's now then strip back the brain and look at what's happening in the amygdala. The amygdala, fight, flight, freeze, releasing cortisol. Contempt is happening through really a series of things that have happened in the amygdala, memories that have been filed away, long-term memories. And the fight, flight, freeze is where you're in a heightened arousal towards an enemy, a threat. And the threat over time is that if he doesn't take out the trash or she doesn't notice me and talk nice to me, all of a sudden the amygdala has these neurons that are having thoughts, releasing neurochemicals that now then are in a fight mode, and it's self-preservation, protection, etc. Well, what's crazy for me, and this is something that I love, is how the anterior cingulate gyrus, the anterior cingulate cortex, which is where our empathy, compassion, and gratitude come from. So when the neurons in those areas begin to be released, it releases what's called the neurochemical oxytocin and vasopressin. And oxytocin is the love bonding agent. It's what makes us feel love to each other. What's also true is that when the anterior cingulate cortex releases the oxytocin, it uniquely calms the amygdala's fight, flight, freeze, and cortisol production then moves into the nucleus accumbens and creates the pleasure centers of the brain where you feel content, fulfilled, and alive. So rather than all of this falling in and out of love happening to us, really what we're experiencing is at the early part of a relationship, you have a lot of hope. It's really falling in and out of hope, not love. It's the idea that this person is now then going to meet needs in me, and together I'm going to be better at being able to approach life, calms down all of the cortisol production of the amygdala. But then when injury happens, when neglect, when there's any kind of relationship gap, the amygdala begins to build around previous profiles and previous memory files, and then they're in that fight, flight, freeze. So if couples will do the exercises in your book, if they will build these emotional triggers, and they're like, listen, if I've got to go to the gym to lose weight and to build muscle, I'm going to have to go to the gym to produce this fire in my heart of romance. And the fire in my heart of romance is going to be, first of all, I've got to do these impact and restitution letters. I release a ton of empathy. I try to envision what it's like to be in that space, to be who they are, to feel what they feel. And then I move into compassion. What are the areas that I can come beside them, to support them, to make their life better, to see them thrive? And then finally, I'm going to create a gratitude, letters and writings. And the letters and writings aren't just for the benefit of the other person. In fact, this whole process is for your benefit. That if you'll do it, you'll have a fireworks show inside your head and your brain, and you'll feel so in love again, and it had nothing to do with randomness. Even simple things like if you go shopping. You know, I know that for me, whenever I do Christmas, Valentine's, all of that, if I write stuff about my wife, it just fuels my romance. If I'm looking for gifts, I shop clothes for her because I like fashion, and I'll go shop clothes for her. It doesn't matter if I buy anything or not. The fact my brain is seeing her wearing this and how cool and great and beautiful she'll be, it awakens the anterior cingulate gyrus, and it releases that oxytocin, vasopressin, and then I feel alive. Neuroscience helps me not think that, and we're all in this together, but not think that it's just a bunch of psychobabble, that this is just... It makes me think, oh my gosh, I can move sliders like on an audio tech board, and I can move this slider down, amygdala. I'm not going to let you move as much cortisol around. I'm going to move this up here that's going to release feelings of joy, that's going to awaken my nucleus accumbens, make me feel content and fulfilled. And so your book and the exercises, I was reading through the exercises and I was like, oh my gosh, this isn't just a book for betrayed partners. This is a book for people that are in a relationship. It's a healthy book for all of those things. Can I ask you, as we wrap this up, what would you say to leaders or pastors? What would you say to young people who, as they're moving into the relationship environment or guiding couples under their leadership, is there anything you would offer to them that could be helpful?
Sure. I think it's really important. I think as a culture, one of the things we need to do is work towards destigmatizing compulsive and addictive sexual behaviors, and also betrayal trauma, and making it easier to talk about. If you look at, we're like where we were 40 years ago with alcoholism. You know, we used to look at alcoholism as a lack of willpower and moral failing and really pathologize people. And then when Betty Ford stood up and people started, getting a lot more educated that this was a brain disease and what have you, our stance towards people with drug addictions has really changed over the years. And we're not there 100% yet. There's still a lot of stigma around drug addiction, but we're a lot better, right? But with sexual betrayal, nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
Porn addiction is still so hard to talk about, in our culture.
Yeah.
And we still really stigmatize betrayed partners.
Yeah.
Like that response that you said with that pastor, well, were you available?
Yeah.
Like, just look at how our culture looks at, how treated Hillary Clinton and, just things like that. Some of the things that were said about her. We need to do a better job as a culture making it okay for our people to come and talk to us about this and get support, because help exists and recovery is possible and treatment works. But if people are too afraid to reach out to get support, then there's going to be a huge failure for so many people that could have otherwise gotten treatment.
Great word. That's a great word. Do you have any final words for us? And ultimately, where can we find out about Stefanie Carnes and all the work you've done?
Oh, sure. Well, I do have a Facebook page, so you can follow me on Facebook. My Courageous Love is now available on Amazon.
Oh, it is?
So, yes.
When did it release? When did it release?
It was about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, so. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. So it's out, so you can grab it. And you can, also reach out to me at find me at ITAP, at the ITAP, sexhelp.com, itap.com. Those are 2 websites that you can find me at. So I just say thank you so much for having me, Patrick. It was a delight to get a chance to spend the hour with you and talk about this.
Thank you so much. It's a over-the-top joy for me. I told you at the beginning, you are one of my heroes. All the work you do, all that you've pioneered, you have shaped so much about what I think, about why we do what we do. You've actually opened up Scripture for me. Because sometimes we take various human behavior scriptures, put them in a box, and then limit them. And what you and your dad and all of our instructors at ITAP and the training we did, you allowed me to look at the text and say, wow, Paul or Jesus or one of the other writers, what if they were inspired in this to know more about it than what I have ever allowed for it to be? And it awakened things in me that have been tremendously helpful. I'm more healthy having been certified. Just going through the 140 hours with you guys has caused me to be a healthier human, and I feel affection to you because of that.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. I'm glad it has been wonderful for you, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. You might be wondering what's next. Consider jumping in on one of our on-demand webinars called Driven People, Driven Leaders. These hour-long trainings are with inspiring and fresh insights from neuroscience, psychology, and theology to help you grow in wholeheartedness in every sphere of life. Attendance will open up a unique opportunity to meet in a small group of people with me and a psychologist therapist to go deeper into what drives people. Go to redinkrrevival.com/webinars today and find out the details. Have you ever wanted to figure you out? You know that if you could solve you or have a deeper understanding of spouses, friends, teammates, and leaders in your organization, you would be unstoppable. When you or your colleagues become stuck, unmotivated, or even triggered, how do you make sense of it all? Join us at our next personal discovery experience with me, Patrick Norris, and psychologist therapist Dr. Todd Bowman. Personal discovery experiences are 2-hour online events with a group of 6 to 20 peers as we discover the roots that drive individual stories. These training events are designed for both pastor leaders and for those who simply want to know what drives them. Our next personal discovery experience cohort for church ministry staff is July the 22nd. The next cohort for the general population is August the 9th. And the next senior pastors cohort will be August 10th. To find out more, go to redinkrrevival.com/driven-people. Would you like to know how addictions form? Would you like to be better equipped to know what drives addictions like alcohol, drugs, porn, promiscuity, gambling, excessive spending, and more? Maybe you have people in your congregation that need credible help right now. Maybe you're the one who actually struggles. We want to train leaders as well as walk with those in the need of recovery throughout their entire journey. The Red Ink recovery process is proven to be effective, designed around theology, psychology, and neuroscience. In July, we are hosting a free webinar Monday, July 13th at 6 p.m. Central Time. Join psychologist Dr. Todd Bowman, a leading expert in addiction recovery, and me, Patrick Norris, a certified trauma and addiction professional. We want to give you an adventure of a lifetime, the adventure of real leadership and real freedom. RedInkRevival.com. For all my pastor friends, if you'd like to co-host a free online Driven People, Driven Leaders webinar with me by inviting a group of your pastor colleagues and networks, we'd love to talk. All you have to do is get 5 to 10 or more senior pastors rallied to jump on with you, and we'll create a private showing just for you and your tribe. Go to RedInkRevival.com/pastors to check it all out. Then contact us with your interest, and we'll get back with you as quick as possible and assess your opportunity. And it's all free. Just check it out. We also have a co-hosting opportunity for church staff, church administrators, and faculty, and then even marketplace leaders for their networks or staff. I hope you'll contact us real soon. And while you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post, and subscribe to our weekly podcast, RedInkRevival.com. Everything that we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our tribe, and I can't wait till our next episode. I'm glad that you were with us today. We'll see you next time.